The sun had barely risen when I stood over my father's grave, the wind whipping across the cemetery, as if nature itself was mourning alongside me. My father had been my anchor, my mentor, and the man who built everything I was standing on today, including our family's sprawling ranch, a property worth more than most people could imagine. That ranch wasn't just real estate. It wasn't just land. It was legacy, blood, sweat, and generations of hard work packed into every acre. To outsiders, it was just a prime piece of property valued at $2.3 million. To me, it was the last living piece of my father. But grief leaves you vulnerable. It blinds you to snakes in the grass. And I had no idea that while I was laying my father to rest, a woman in my community, a self-appointed enforcer of HOA laws, who everyone called Karen, was sharpening her claws. Karen wasn't your ordinary nosy neighbor. She was the queen bee of the homeowners association, the type who thought she had the right to dictate the length of your grass, the color of your shutters, and how many vehicles could sit in your driveway. She lived for power trips, and everyone in the neighborhood knew it. But Karen had a special hatred for me and my family. She never liked my father, because he refused to bend to her petty demands. He was polite, but firm, a man who believed in handling his own business. When she tried to fine him for keeping a working trailer on his own land, he sent her HOA letters back with a single phrase written across them in his bold handwriting. "This ranch isn't yours." So when he passed, I should have expected she'd see her opening. A few days after the funeral, I was sitting in my father's study, looking at the old leather chair he used to occupy, when my phone buzzed. It was my cousin, who lived a few miles down the road. "You'd better get home," he warned. "There's a crowd at your ranch. And Karen's at the center of it." My stomach dropped. I jumped into my truck and floored it down the dirt road leading to the ranch. Dust clouds rose behind me as my mind raced. When I pulled up, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Strangers in nice clothes were milling around, clipboards in hand, while Karen stood at the porch like a queen about to sell off her throne. A banner flapped in the wind. "Foreclosure auction, private HOA sale." I nearly choked. Karen spotted me and smirked like a vulture that had finally cornered its prey. "You're late," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We're just about to begin the bidding." The crowd, realtors, investors, and a few greedy-looking neighbors, looked at me like I was the trespasser. On my own damn land. "What the hell is this?" I barked, pushing through the crowd. Karen crossed her arms. "According to HOA bylaws, your father left behind unpaid fines. Since you inherited the property, the debt falls to you. We've chosen to seize the property and liquidate it." I clenched my fists. "That's a lie. My father didn't owe you a dime." She sneered. "He ignored our notices. That counts as unpaid debt." I could feel every eye on me, waiting to see if I'd fold. Waiting to see if the $2.3 million ranch, that had been in my family for generations, was about to be stolen in broad daylight. But Karen didn't know one thing: my father didn't just leave me land. He left me the fire in my blood. The crowd buzzed with murmurs, some investors whispering numbers, others smirking like they'd already struck gold. My ranch, my father's legacy, had been turned into a spectacle for profit. Karen, smug as ever, waved a clipboard in the air. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin the bidding at $1.5 million. That's a fair price for such a large property, especially considering the complications." "Complications?" I snapped. Karen smiled like a cat that had cornered a mouse. "Well, technically, the property is in dispute. But with HOA authority backing this auction, it'll all be resolved quickly. You should really thank me. You wouldn't want to carry your father's debts, would you?" I stepped forward, my boots crunching against the gravel. There's no debt. You made this up. The investors shifted uncomfortably. A few lowered their clipboards, realizing something was off. But others still hovered, greed clouding their judgment. Karen held her ground. It doesn't matter what you think. We followed procedure. And unless you can prove otherwise right this second, the auction proceeds. That's when my father's words echoed in my head, words he used to drill into me every time the HOA tried to pull their stunts. Don't let paper pushers steal what sweat built. I took a deep breath, pulled my phone out, and opened my father's carefully organized files. He had been meticulous, every letter, every notice, every response carefully scanned and stored. And sure enough, there they were, stamped, signed documents from a lawyer confirming that the HOA had no jurisdiction over our ranch. I raised my phone, screen glowing. You see this? Court ruling. Clear as day. The HOA has no claim on this ranch. That means this auction is illegal. Every one of you standing here thinking you're buying land, you're just buying a lawsuit. A hush fell over the crowd. Some backed away immediately, muttering. One realtor even cursed under her breath and stormed off. But a few stubborn ones stayed, greed outweighing common sense. Karen's smile faltered, but she quickly plastered it back on. He's bluffing. Don't let him scare you. This auction is fully authorized. Authorized by who? I barked. You? You're not a judge. You're not law enforcement. You're just a bitter neighbor with too much time on your hands. The crowd's mood shifted. Karen could feel it too. Her grip on the situation was slipping. That's when she made her mistake. She raised her chin and said loudly, "If you don't leave, we'll consider you trespassing on HOA property." That was the final straw. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because the audacity of it all was almost unbelievable. Trespassing? On my own ranch? Lady, this land has been in my family for 3 generations. My father built this place with his bare hands. And you think a couple of fake fines and a cheap banner give you the right to sell it off? I pulled the banner down and threw it on the ground. This auction is over. The silence was thick enough to choke on. Karen's face twisted in rage. Her carefully curated mask of control was cracking. She hissed, "You'll regret this. The HOA always wins." I leaned in just enough for her to hear the steel in my voice. Not today. The investors scattered, but Karen didn't back down. She stood her ground on the porch, red-faced and trembling with fury. For her, this wasn't about fines or bylaws anymore. It was about power. And losing in front of an audience wasn't something she could stomach. As I watched her, I realized something important. This wasn't the end of her schemes. It was just the beginning. Because people like Karen didn't stop when you embarrassed them. They came back harder, nastier, and more desperate. And sure enough, the very next morning, I woke up to the sound of trucks outside my property. Karen wasn't done with me. Not by a long shot. The next morning started with the rumble of engines outside my window. I pulled back the curtain and felt my stomach twist. 3 white pickup trucks and a black SUV were lined up along the fence line of my ranch. Karen was there, of course, standing tall in her sun hat like a general about to lead troops into battle. Beside her were 3 men in suits, HOA board members, no doubt, and 2 uniformed officers. I muttered under my breath, "Here we go again." I slipped on my boots, grabbed my hat, and stepped out onto the porch. "Morning," I called, though my tone carried no warmth. Karen didn't waste a second. "This is your final warning," she shouted, loud enough for the whole valley to hear. Your father left outstanding fines. You resisted a lawful HOA auction yesterday. Now we've brought enforcement. The officers stepped forward, but I noticed their hesitation. Their hands weren't anywhere near their belts. They weren't here on their own accord. They'd been dragged into a neighborhood spat by a woman with a knack for twisting words. One of them, a younger officer, spoke up. Sir, the HOA filed a complaint claiming you're in violation of multiple codes. We're here to check. I held up a hand. Officer, this ranch isn't even inside HOA boundaries. I have paperwork proving it. Their complaint has no legal standing. I pulled the folder my father had kept, crisp and ready. I handed over the documents, stamped by the county and signed by a judge years back. The officer scanned them, then looked at Karen. This says your HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over his property. At all. Karen's face flushed, but she recovered quickly. Those papers are old. Things have changed. Not that much, I cut in. Laws don't change just because you want them to. The officers exchanged glances. One finally sighed. Unless you have new court orders, there's nothing we can do here. Karen's jaw dropped. For the second time in 2 days, she'd been publicly undercut. The officers turned and left, their SUV kicking up dust as they drove away. But the men in suits stayed behind. One, tall with slicked back hair, stepped forward. We're not done here. You may have legal papers, but the HOA board has deep pockets. We can tie you up in court for years. And while you're drowning in legal fees, we'll take what's ours. I narrowed my eyes. You think money scares me? My father raised me tougher than that. You want to play dirty in court? Fine. But step foot on my land again, and you'll find out just how serious I am about defending it. Karen's lips curled into a wicked smile. Threats? That's all you've got? I didn't answer. I just stared, steady and unflinching, until they all backed toward their trucks. As the engines roared to life and the dust rose behind them, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat. She was going to push until something snapped. That night, I sat at my father's desk, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows on the wood grain. My father's rifle leaned in the corner, polished and ready. He always said a man should never go looking for trouble, but he should damn well be ready when trouble comes looking for him. And trouble was coming. Because if Karen couldn't win with fake auctions and fake fines, she was going to try something riskier. Something desperate. 2 nights later, it happened. I woke to the sound of footsteps on the gravel driveway. Slow, deliberate, far too late for a friendly visit. I peered out the window and saw flashlights cutting through the dark. At least 5 figures moved toward my barn. And leading them, that sunhat. Karen. She had come back in the dead of night with hired muscle. And now they were trespassing, on my father's land, on my family's legacy. I grabbed the rifle, loaded a single round, and stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked beneath me, the sound sharp against the silence of the night. The flashlights froze, then turned toward me. Karen, I called out, my voice calm but firm. You've crossed the line. She laughed. Actually laughed. This property isn't yours anymore. Tonight, we take possession. You can leave, or you can be removed. I leveled the rifle, not at them, but high into the night sky. And I fired a warning shot. The crack split the air like thunder, echoing off the hills. Birds erupted from the trees, wings thrashing. The flashlights wavered, the men with her stumbling back. Karen froze, her face pale in the beam of her own light. Next one, I said coldly, won't be in the air. The echo of the rifle shot rolled across the valley like a drumbeat. For a moment, the world stood still. The men Karen had dragged onto my property shuffled nervously, exchanging glances like prey realizing they'd wandered too close to a predator. Karen, however, was frozen. Her bravado had cracked, leaving nothing but the raw face of fear beneath. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. "You've trespassed," I said, voice steady as steel. "You've harassed me during my father's funeral. You've staged a fake auction. And now, in the middle of the night, you bring men to my land. This ends tonight." One of the hired men raised his hands. "We didn't sign up for this. Karen told us the place was abandoned." His voice wavered. "We're leaving." "Smart choice," I replied. The men backed away, dropping their tools, bolt cutters, ropes, even a crowbar, leaving them scattered across the dirt like evidence at a crime scene. Their trucks roared to life seconds later, fleeing down the road as fast as the engines could carry them. That left only Karen. She stood there, trembling but defiant, her flashlight shaking in her hand. "You can't scare me," she spat, though the quiver in her voice betrayed her. "The HOA will bury you in court. You'll lose everything." I lowered the rifle, but kept my stance firm. "No, Karen. The only one about to lose everything is you." The call that changed everything. I pulled out my phone and dialed the sheriff's office. Karen's eyes widened. "You're really going to involve them?" she hissed. "Damn right," I said. "Trespassing. Harassment. Attempted property theft. And now, breaking and entering. You just stacked the charges high enough to choke on." Within 20 minutes, sirens cut through the night. The red and blue lights painted the ranch as deputies poured onto the property. The sheriff himself stepped out, a heavy-set man with a deep voice who had known my father for decades. "What's going on here?" he demanded. I handed him the folder of documents, showed him the fake auction banner Karen had left behind, and pointed to the tools abandoned in the dirt. The sheriff's expression hardened as the pieces fell into place. He turned to Karen. Is this true?" Karen crossed her arms, but her confidence was gone. I was enforcing HOA rights. He's lying. He doesn't respect the rules. Someone has to keep order." The sheriff shook his head. "Lady, this property is outside HOA jurisdiction. Which means what you did here tonight is criminal trespass, attempted fraud, and harassment." Her jaw dropped. "You can't do this. I am the HOA." "No," the sheriff said flatly, pulling out his cuffs. "Right now, you're under arrest. The community learns the truth." The news spread through the valley like wildfire. By sunrise, everyone knew what Karen had tried to do. The once feared queen of the HOA was now a laughingstock, paraded in front of her neighbors as deputies hauled her into the back of a cruiser. For years, she had terrorized homeowners with fines, threats, and petty rules. But her empire crumbled overnight. HOA board members scrambled to distance themselves, claiming they had no idea she'd gone rogue. Investigators later proved otherwise, exposing years of shady practices and misappropriated funds. Karen wasn't just disliked anymore. She was finished. A ranch restored. Weeks later, I stood on the porch of the ranch, the morning sun spilling golden light across the fields my father had tended. For the first time since his passing, I felt peace. The banner was gone. The threat was gone. And Karen. She was facing a stack of charges that would keep her far away from my land for years. As I leaned against the railing, I whispered to the empty sky, "We did it, Dad. They tried to take it, but it's still ours." The wind moved through the trees, and for a fleeting moment, I swore I felt his presence, strong, proud, unyielding. The ranch was safe. The legacy endured. And one well-timed warning shot had put an end to Karen's reign once and for all.